Hey everybody, hi Horror Tree family, followers, first timers, welcome. I'm Sarah Elliott here for another author interview, and today I'm interviewing you'll soon find out, awesome Stacey Thomas. Welcome, Stacey.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and hi everyone as well.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Stacey, and I'll be showing this quite a few times, so get familiar with the cover. If you see it in a bookshop, pick it up. Okay, so Stacey Thomas has studied English at history. Let me start that again. Deep breath, Sarah. Stacey Thomas studied English and history at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. She's a contributor to Bad Form Review and an alumna of the Curtis Brown Creative Novel Writing course. In 2021, she was announced as one of the 3 winners of HarperCollins's inaugural Killing It competition for undiscovered writers. See, our Stacey's already so accomplished. That's why you were making me nervous.
Oh, God, really?
Okay, Stacey, got a couple of warm-up questions. So for this
Yes.
interview, everybody who is watching and listening, we are going to split it into 2 parts. So the first part will all be about the Revels book, which is Stacey's debut novel. And then in the second part of the interview, we'll learn a little bit more about Stacey's writing process and her journey to publication. So Stacey, I know from listening to some of your other interviews, you've got like the elevator pitch to your book down to a T and you can just reel it off. But I'm going to save you from that
Oh,
today.
God, yeah.
So can you
Thank you.
describe your book in 1 word?
Ooh, I would say, oh, God. Okay. The one, if I, since I have to, I would say atmospheric, I guess,
Okay.
if
Well
that's a
done.
good one.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay. That's
you.
all right. So we know the title of your book is The Revels. There we go.
Yes.
If that wasn't the title, what would it be? What else were you kind of contemplating before you arrived at a final decision?
So if it wasn't like the other 2 kind of ideas I had were very close to the Rebels, so it would have either been the Revelers or Dark Rebels. And so I always kind of had those titles along with the Rebels like floating along from like the very beginning, and probably because like it ties into the story. So I was really lucky to have kind of like just grasped it immediately. And I was also quite lucky in that like neither my agent or my editor ever suggested at any point changing the title, which I know is like it's quite rare. So yeah,
Yeah, I bet you breathed a huge sigh of relief with that.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't want to go back to the drawing board and think, what else can I call it?
Yeah, because I feel like if I had to, like, probably before I latched onto the Rebels, like when I was still in the research stages, I was probably just calling it like the Witch Hunter's Apprentice, which is like it's just such a terrible title, but like obviously like that's what Nicholas becomes. And it's kind of like if I did have to go back to the drawing board, I would have been like, well, maybe the Witch Hunter's Apprentice, even though, oh God, it just sounds a bit like maybe I don't know, it's like it's not really what the story is about in a way, even though it is. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it does. I think if you'd have called it The Witch Finder's Apprentice, it would have kind of summed it up, like, it does what it says on the tin. But like you said, there's so much more to that. It wouldn't have given it as much justice. And I think,
Yeah, yeah.
especially for me, with it being called The Rebels, I'm like, why is it called that? I want to find out a little bit more about it. So you mentioned witch hunting already. Can you define a witch for us?
So in my book, like a witch is basically someone who has like powers, and it's like I kind of like I was very much inspired by like the English like witch hunts. And so obviously we know that they weren't hunting like real witches. They were basically hunting people who, didn't fit in with society, and either because they were too poor, or it's like their personalities were just kind of too like unconventional. So like witches were definitely like the outsiders. And like, when I was growing up, like I was really kind of, interested in like those witchy films and those witchy books. And to me, like the witch, like even if they didn't have powers, like the witch was always just the outsider. They were always just someone like different. And so I feel like I really wanted to kind of bring that out like in my own book as well.
So kind of like telling their story as well. So bringing it all to light as well.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, and it's definitely current as well, isn't it? Because there's obviously like the Witches of Scotland podcast, and they're doing a lot of work
Yes.
around that as well. And I
Yeah.
know that you've done a lot of research. I just want to tell people, if you haven't already, go and follow Stacey on TikTok. There is so much you've got so much information there, just little snippets of, oh wow, that's really interesting. So that's, yeah, a little tip. If you want to find out more about that, go follow Stacey on TikTok. So I know that you're interested in like the witches and the supernatural, and you've obviously got a great interest in history. Would you say you're more into history than the supernatural, or is it kind of like the same?
So I feel like with history, like historical fiction history, like it's always been like my first love, and like I studied it at university. And then so I feel like, I'm more interested in the historical side of it. But then when I like, kind of realized that I wanted to write about the witch trials, I kind of just felt like even though I wanted to be like authentic to the period and kind of, true to life to what happened, it's like I just couldn't resist the urge to kind of lean into that kind of supernatural aspect. And I think it's because so many of the stories like I read, like even if it is historical fiction, a lot of them have that kind of slightly kind of, supernatural where it's like, oh, is magic real or isn't it? Or sometimes like, you go full kind of like magic in a way. And so I feel like for me, like I love stories set in the past, but it's like I love it when it's doing something slightly different, where it's like it's just bringing in like something slightly like unexpected. And like I feel like for me, it was like it was a perfect kind of excuse to kind of like combine like kind of my two passions in a way.
Yeah, I can totally see that. That makes sense. I bet you're like, oh, I can write about both things. That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing
I
I'm
feel like
curious.
the hardest, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, like, the hardest thing was probably just trying to, like, find a balance between, like, the two kind of genres. And it's like with my agent, like, she was just wonderful in, like, kind of guiding me in the right direction while we were just going through, like, edits as well.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about, Stacey, is why James the First? So you mention in towards the end of your book in your author's note that the story of the Revels was originally sparked by an interest in James the First. And I'm just curious as to, out of all the kind of monarchs, why it was James the First that kind of drew your attention. Because if you ask like someone on the street who's one of the most well-known monarchs, they would say, oh, Henry VIII, Queen Victoria, Elizabeth the First. So
Yes.
what kind of drew you to James the First?
I feel like with him, because his mother was Mary, like Queen of Scots, so it's like I was just really fascinated by her story, and then obviously it's just that thing she spends like years in imprisonment. So basically, King James, he grew up without her present, and I feel like with King James, like when I started to learn about the witch trials, I was just very, very interested in King James because obviously he was obsessed with witches. He believed they were out to kill him. And in some ways, he was like the original witch hunter. And I just felt like for a king in that time where it's like you were so paranoid about being, assassinated and that, like that basically everyone was trying to conspire to kill you. But it's kind of like, didn't you have more like better things to do than to kind of like whip up this witch hysteria and actually involve yourself and investigate like witch cases? And so I feel like for me it's like I was just really I kind of just wanted to know like what was that about in a way, because it's like he just seems so, it's just such a strange like thing to do. And I kind of like I really wanted to like just kind of dig in and just kind of really kind of see like the influence he had on the kind of witch hunting practices at the time as well. And I guess because it is just like so strange, I feel like each kind of monarch like has their quirks in a way. And like King James, like with the witch hunting, it was kind of like it I mean, obviously, it sounds quite dismissive to say like it's such a strange hobby, but it's kind of like for him, it was kind of like his hobby for a time period. And it's kind of like, why would you pick that? You know, when other monarchs would kind of, build model farms or, like paint or like embroider, and it's kind of like if you're choosing to spend your limited time doing this, it's yeah.
Yeah, so you're kind of like intrigued, like why was he interested in this? Or why did he put so much time and energy into it? And
I know, yeah.
yeah, it's really great as well because I feel through reading your book, not only am I drawn into the story and the characters, really enjoying it, I feel like I'm getting an education as well. And it's like I wish that in schools there were more like books of your standard that children and young people could have access to and that were taught on the curriculum,
Oh,
because it's such an interesting way to learn about history through like historical fiction and weaving in the supernatural as well. So let's get more books like yours out on the curriculum.
oh, thank you.
So in terms of like your research, how long did you spend researching? And when you had like in the early edits of your book, did you find that you felt you had to kind of take out some of the research that was evident in the book, or did you feel like you had to put more in? What were your first thoughts?
So I probably, before I even started writing, like I spent like a few months researching it because even though I did history at university, I never had a chance to study the Civil War. So I kind of just felt like I was just kind of, going in like completely fresh to the period. And it's like I wanted to really kind of just get an insight into kind of, how people like lived, like, lead up to the Civil War and the witch trials, so I can really imagine myself like in the world. And then even when I started writing, I was kind of still like researching like alongside it because I wanted to just kind of find out everything I knew about the witch trials, not because I wanted to cram it into the book, but because I kind of felt like if I could understand exactly what happened, then it's like I have the understanding. And then when I'm writing my story, it's kind of like I can choose what to keep for the story and like what to disregard. And then like in my author's note in my book, it's kind of like I say like, okay, this is what happened, but then it's like for my story, I've gone like this angle for like the purposes of the story, because it's like as much as I love history, it's like I love writing stories more. So I kind of like, even though, I want my readers to kind of have all these kind of interesting facts and stuff, I want it to feel more like a story as opposed to like a textbook. And
Yeah.
I feel kind of like, because I just remembered someone just like another author telling me it's kind of that you only use 10% of the research you do for historical fiction. So even if you do tons and tons of it, it is just quite painful that you only use like
Yeah.
such a small amount. And so when I was I think especially when I was going through Reddit, so I had the story down, it's kind of like I was continuing to just do like research just to kind of, double check some information. And it's like I was so glad I did, because I misnamed someone and I was like, oh my God, how did this slip through? And it's like luckily it was fixed before it went to print. But then I felt like I was kind of adding in some bits in service of the story, but then it's like I also got to a point where it's like I felt like I was getting better at like, okay, this is a bit too much. I can take this out because it's kind of like it's not in service of the story.
Mhm.
But it's kind of like it is just that kind of delicate kind of balance to kind of achieve in a way. But yeah, it's kind of just that thing. It's kind of like once you know like what your story is, it's kind of like you have a feel for it. So it's kind of like when like a fact is in service of the story and when it's kind of
Mm.
like it's slightly a bit too much.
Yeah, that's really good advice as well, especially about literally what you just said. Is it in service to the story? Is it too much? And also about the 10%. And I can imagine that must have been quite painful to be like, I've
Yeah.
done all of this, but I can't put it all in the book.
Oh god, yeah, because it's like luckily like I still have my notes. So like if I ever like decide to write a sequel or like set like another story in that time period, then it's like I have my notes to draw
Mm,
upon. But it is just that thing when you have hundreds of pages of notes, it's kind of like that could be a book in itself. So it's like
yeah,
it is hard just to let go of it because it's kind of like, oh, but it's like, well, I have all of this, like why can't I fit it all in? It's kind of like because a person wants a story, they don't want a textbook, and you have to like keep telling yourself that so you can just
yeah.
very slowly like let go.
What was the most interesting fact that you discovered through your research?
Ooh. So this is going to sound like quite gruesome, but I guess one of the most interesting facts was probably the kind of the torture methods. Like obviously like when they were trying to get witches to confess, and so it was, the sleep deprivation, like the thumb screws and like the swimming as well. And then I feel like what I was really quite interested in, what comes into play in my book, is the whole idea of witch pamphlets. So even before like the kind of the witch hunting, it's kind of like you had this period where basically the printing presses were printing like witch pamphlets, and these were accounts of like real witch trials or like made up ones like from Europe, but they were circulated across the whole of the UK. And I feel like for me, it's kind of like I was just really surprised by this, and I was able to see like, originals like on the archives. But then it's kind of like the fact is when you usually when you think about the witch hunting, like the witch hysteria, it just seems to come out of nowhere. Like, people
Mm,
just kind of give into this hysteria. And like what I realized through these pamphlets was that, kind of people kind of, grow up with this. And it's like, they might read those pamphlets and then dismiss it. But then it's kind of like when times are hard, you've grown up on those pamphlets on the story. So it's like in the back of your mind, you've been primed and you've been warned that the supernatural is a threat and there are witches all around you and like the devil is out to get you. And so you can understand like why people begin to panic, because it's like there's that whole kind of culture of misinformation.
mm,
And it's kind of like it's very easy for people to reach for it, because obviously in those times like so much like happened like in terms of like, your health. It's like you wouldn't really have like a medical reason for like why you're ill or why your cows are
of
suddenly
course,
dying.
yes,
So
yeah,
it's like it was very easy to just blame the supernatural.
yeah. And I guess it's back then the pamphlets were a form of propaganda, so people are almost getting programmed, and that is their actual reality as well, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah, which can
yes,
be
and like
quite scary. Yeah.
and I think propaganda and also entertainment as well, because with
Mm,
the pamphlets, they were written in English at a time when, the educated were reading like books in Latin, and they were also sold quite cheaply. So it was that thing, it's like everyone could buy them if they could afford to, because it wouldn't really put much of a dent in your pockets. But
yeah.
yeah, so it was just that thing, it's that they really wanted people to read this stuff. And
It reminds me of like Lady Whistledown's pamphlets in Bridgerton.
oh my God,
Because they were
yeah.
reading those for entertainment, weren't they? And I
Yeah,
guess the modern equivalent would be like social media, but also many of the kind of like real life programs that we have now as well. So some of
yes,
those
yeah.
would like be the equivalent, watching like Big Brother and things like that.
Yeah.
It's a good job I didn't have that technology back then. You're really
I know.
scary.
Yeah, because it's like there was no kind of like you're getting all of these pamphlets and all these claims of like, witches doing this and that. And it's kind of like what I can never see anyone just saying, oh, this claim is actually a lie. Like people weren't
Mm,
interested in the truth. They just wanted their entertainment. So it was really like, dangerous as well.
yeah. Well, let's dip into the book a little bit. So I just want to read something from the inside cover. I also wanted to give a shout out to Tea Leaves and Reads, which was the independent bookshop that I got this from. They were lovely.
Oh,
Came in a
perfect.
lovely package. I got a
Oh.
signed copy. Let me show. There we go. So yeah, definitely recommend if you're going to purchase it, that would be one of the bookshops I'd recommend. Okay. So the stage is set and the witch hunt is about to begin. England, 1645. After his half-brother dies, aspiring playwright Nicholas Pearce is apprenticed to Judge William Percival, an infamous former witch hunter who is under pressure to resume his old profession. In a country torn apart by civil war, with escalating tensions between Catholics and Protestants, royalists and roundheads, and rumours of witchcraft, Nicholas hides a secret. The dead sing. He hears their secrets, but will he find the courage to speak up to save innocent lives, even if it means putting himself in great danger? Why would you not pick the book up to find out? So it mentions the character Will,
Yes.
and I'm thinking, is Will, am I right in assuming that Will is based on Matthew Hopkins?
Yes, so basically he's inspired by like Matthew Hopkins, like Witchfinder General, and then there are other witch hunters as well who are also like inspired by him too. Just because with like people who don't know, like Matthew Hopkins, he was the most one of the most infamous witch hunters in England, and he was active in East Anglia during the Civil War. And it's like, what's interesting about him was that he was quite young when he took up witch hunting. He was 23, but he treated it very much like a business. He hung hundreds of women and men, and it's like he was just very like ruthless. He pretended that Parliament had given him this commission to hunt witches, hence the title Witchfinder General. And it was like he would advertise his services to town, in advance of his arrival, saying, if you have any witches, I'm happy to get rid of them for you in return, obviously for a very high fee, which ended up getting him into trouble because it was costing towns more to pay him to get rid of witches than it was to just, leave like the innocent people like they were targeting alone. But yeah, I just think with Matthew Hopkins, it's like there's been quite a few films written about him, including like I think it was a film in the 1970s called Witchfinder General, which I
Yes.
watched,
Yeah.
and it's just so creepy and terrifying. But it's like I've always just had him as the figure in the back of my mind because you just wonder like, why would you choose to do this? And I feel like that was one of the reasons like why I was kind of inspired to write the Revels, because I wanted to know like why would you choose to be a witch hunter, especially if you kind of know deep down like the women you're hunting and the men as well, like they're innocent, they don't have any powers, they're just poor, but it's kind of like the towns want to get rid of them because they're a burden to like the parish relief. And so that's kind of what really kind of motivated me to kind of like explore their kind of like motivations in the story.
Excellent. So we mentioned Nicholas has a special power. Tell us a little bit more about Nicholas's special power. Why did you choose that particular power for him to have?
Yes. So basically with Nicholas, he can hear the dead kind of sing. So it's kind of like, they sing their kind of secrets. And originally, I guess you can tell like the Sixth Sense was kind of like a big inspiration
Oh, yeah.
because originally it's like he could hear the dead talk. And I was kind of like, oh, it's kind of like that's a bit too much of the Sixth Sense. Although I had a very creepy scene where he's in a morgue and all the dead are kind of whispering. But then it was
Yeah,
like,
that
oh,
is
well, if the
creepy.
dead yeah, well if the dead sing instead, and it's kind of like it's not like they break out into musical theatre, it's like they're still very much dead, but it's sort of like you can hear their song. So in a way it's kind of like they're speaking as well. But like I feel like with that, because with Nicholas's character, like when he starts the book, his brother has just died who he was very close to, and he's not close to any of the other people like in his family because his mother died in childbirth. He's illegitimate, and it's like his father and stepmother have always made him feel unwelcome. So his brothers died, and it's kind of like so he feels quite alone, and he's also struggling with guilt and immense grief around his brother's death as well. And so as I was writing, I kind of just felt like, his ability to hear the dead, to hear them sing, it's kind of like it kind of tied into kind of what he was going through, and especially as like as he's grown up and he's realized he has powers, he's had to suppress them. So it's like he's had to kind of, try to do his best to silence the dead. And like I feel like what I enjoyed about writing the story is that, you know, he gradually kind of, you know, deals with his grief with over his brother's death at the same time that he begins to kind of, you know, accept his powers as well. So I loved how, you know, like acceptance and kind of like grief, they went like hand in hand, like when I was developing like his character story.
Yeah. Um, so Stacey, what superpower would you give yourself if you had a choice? I have to admit that having the dead sing is way more creepy than just being able to like hear them or see them. The singing
Yeah.
is just next level creepiness for me. So that was a good choice. Well, yeah, if you
Yeah.
had your own superpower.
I feel like I would want to travel back in time. And it's
Mm.
kind of like, I mean, I write my next book set in the 1950s, and it's kind of like, I wouldn't want to live there, but I could just imagine myself making day trips to just buy like as many of those new look dresses as I can. And probably, yeah, because it's kind of like I just go on different adventures where I just go back to like different like time periods. Like that would be my power. And like, you know, if I'm able to be greedy and have like another one, I'd love to have like telekinesis to like just being able to like move like different objects as well.
Yeah, that one just looks like fun, doesn't it? For both, actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's great because I guess because at the moment, as far as I know, we're not able to time travel. But I think reading historical fiction and getting into books and watching films is like the next best thing. So you can really immerse yourself in it. And what I like about your book particularly is that you do feel fully immersed in it because the way you've written it in first person, it's just like
Yes.
you can feel that you become Nicholas telling the story. So it really draws you in. Was that intentional, that choice?
So I feel like I can only write in first person anyway, because like
Ah,
even though I love reading books like from different tenses, I feel like for me, like when I'm writing, I can only make the story feel alive, like in the first person. And I feel like maybe it's because with my character, it's like I kind of go method, and this probably is why I kind of spend so much time in the research stage, so I can imagine what it was like to live in those times. But like I feel like with the first person, it's like it's easy for me to like get a handle of the story because I can
mm,
just even though I'm different from my characters, I can kind of like in their mindset. And
yeah.
so it's easy for me to kind of just navigate like all their situations as well. And then it's like you feel kind of closer to the action as well. So
Mm,
it's like it just I don't know, it just makes it just brings it to life for me. And it's like I feel like I really do respond to books like written in the first person as well, because it's kind of like you can kind of experience the actions alongside your character, like you're right there like with them as well.
yeah, yeah. I love that about this book.
Oh,
Tell us a little bit more about the title, The Revels. What does it mean?
so yes, so with the Revels, like in so I think this was it was set up during the Tudor time, but it was definitely active like during the Stuart period as well. So basically, and also Shakespeare's time as well. So basically the Master of Revels, that was like an official post. And so the Master of Revels, he was in charge of deciding which plays could be performed in front of the court. And so if there was something about your play he didn't like, he could order you to kind of make changes, cut scenes, or he could just say, actually, this isn't fit for the royal court. You can just take it on tour across the country instead. And so I was kind of just drawn to that kind of post because obviously it's that idea like, you know, you're in control of kind of shaping the proceedings. Like that role came with a lot of power. And then, you know, after the Civil War, like you had the interim period. And then when King Charles II came back, it was like that post, he just made that post kind of like meaningless. Like they didn't really have any power anymore. And then they got rid of it. But like, I love the kind of idea that you have the Master of Rebels who's kind of in charge of like shaping the proceedings. And I felt like it tied into my book because it's kind of like, you know, the witch hunters and the people who were kind of the bystanders. In a way, like the witch hunting is a form of entertainment. And so obviously it's like the
Mm,
witch hunter is the master of rebels because he
yes.
gets to
Yeah.
decide like, you know, who's going to star in his like performance and like how the proceedings are going to end. And I feel like with the characters in a way they're all trying to be, the master of Revels because they all want to kind of shape the narrative to their own purposes. Like everyone has an idea of what the ending should be. So it's kind of like that kind of theatricality and that kind of like tussle for power as well.
Yeah, thank you. Why did you write the Revels? Why now?
Oh, I feel like because I started writing it during lockdown, and so I wrote it on the back of like this YA contemporary kind of like slight fantasy that basically it was terrible and like I couldn't get an agent for. But I kind of had footnotes in the style of like Susanna's Clark's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And like with one of those footnotes, it's like I had a reference to Matthew Hopkins and like, one of his like victims. And so I kind of realized, oh, I'm actually quite interested in this because I'd never really written like a full-length historical fiction novel before. So I kind of just felt like it's kind of now or never, like because it's like I have the time to really kind of do the research for it. And so I feel like for me, I was just drawn to the historical aspect and like the supernatural aspect. And then it was just that thing. It's like I felt like, I had the kind of confidence to kind of write in a genre that I'd always kind of just been a bit too scared of before because of the amount of work like involved. And it's kind of like the story has like I always had like my character Nicholas in mind, but it's kind of like the story kind of, it's really kind of developed like from that first idea. And I feel it's because it's like I was just asking myself questions like, why do I want to write this story? Like, why am I writing this character? So that kind of really helped me to kind of develop it, like kind of when I was going through edits as well.
Oh, fantastic. And that will link beautifully to the second part of the interview with Stacey. We're going to find out a little bit more about Stacey's writing process, going from those initial chapters during lockdown to actually, this being out in the world, which must be a fantastic feeling for you, Stacey. So
It
thanks for
is,
talking
yeah.
to us so far about the Revels, the book itself. And in part two, we're going to find out a little bit more about Stacey, the author, and hopefully pick up some more tips as well. So see you shortly. Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you.